This should have been a simple assignment for Jill Biden. Go down to this Hispanic outreach event in Texas, be nice, make the people love you, and hopefully that will do something to help your husband's approval rating among that particular demographic group, which has been exsanguinating like a hemophiliac on an aspirin bender, perhaps improve slightly, which is sort of the whole reason he couldn't go down there himself. Now, stealing a line from the Babylon Bee is something I would never do lightly, but this is one of those rare cases where someone else has said something better than I could have, and I am magnanimous enough to admit it. So here's their headline. White House still looking for a Biden they can send out in public. We already knew this old guy was in a hell of a lot of trouble, but when you send the First Lady to perform a task that should be fairly easy, and she turns it into the political equivalent of drinking turpentine and pissing on a brush fire, well, you're in even worse trouble than you thought. And we can't really blame this one on Jill getting defeated by the teleprompter, because she did manage to successfully read the words they had written for her. Well, all except for the word bodega. Clearly, Mrs. Biden has never seen the classic Dave Chappelle stoner comedy Half-Baked, or she would be intimately acquainted, as the rest of us are, with the precise manner in which the word bodega is correctly pronounced. Or, alternatively, you could just say bogada and call it a day. And if that had been the biggest gaffe in this speech, which was given at something called the Latinx Inclusion Seminar, which I think it's safe to say we have passed peak woke when they feel the need to make the word inclusion more inclusive, then you probably never would have heard about this stupid speech at this stupid event, and it certainly would not have caused a political scandal. So, if there is an easy moral to this story, I believe it is this. When you are the one giving a speech and someone else is writing it, feel free to give it a quick once-over before they load it into the prompter and you have to go up on stage, because that affords you, the speaker, a very valuable opportunity to say, you know, guys, I think if I tell this crowd they're as diverse as breakfast tacos, that might come off sounding kind of paternalist and a bit offensive. Granted, it wouldn't be nearly as offensive as a bunch of dumb white liberals telling the speakers of a gendered language that they have to ungender it so they can be in better concordance with the inclusivity standards of dumb white liberals, but I just feel like it wouldn't go over all that well. I feel like it might defeat the purpose of me making the trip instead of my husband. Because Joe, he can say racially offensive things all on his own. He's really good at it, actually. You might even say it's one of his trademarks, along with sniffing the hair of preteen girls and sending his crackhead son around the globe to pick up briefcases full of cash. It was 59 years ago last month that President John F. Kennedy flew to a blockaded West Berlin and said to the people of that city, people who had been our mortal enemies a mere 17 years prior, Ich bin ein Berliner. And it wasn't because he wanted to show off his German skills, of which he had none. Rather, it was because he wanted a one-sentence statement, something he could say that would signal to the West Berliners, we're with you, I'm with you, you're not suffering this burden alone, so I am declaring on behalf of all the freedom-loving people in the world today that here right now we are all Berliners. And after that speech, we saw a very early example of what today we would call spin, or even gaslighting, because immediately the Republicans seized on Kennedy's pronunciation of the word Berliner and started a rumor that he had really inadvertently said, I am a jelly donut. And regrettably, that grew into a myth that still persists today. But it was never true. A person from Berlin is called a Berliner, and there's also a type of donut that's called a Berliner. A word can have more than one distinct meaning. We have plenty of those in English, which occurred to me this morning when I look at my YouTube analytics and saw the heading, How Viewers Find Your Shorts. And maybe it's just me, but I feel like they could have worded that a little bit more artfully. Who knows? Maybe I just need to extricate my brain out of the gutter. But the point I'm getting at in bringing up Kennedy and Berlin is that Jill Biden can fix this snafu just as quickly as she caused it by flying back down to Texas, going right back to that Latinx Inclusion Seminar, marching up to that podium and saying with every last scrap of statesmanship she can muster, Ich bin ein Breakfast Taco. atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where Wednesday happy hour means 2 tankards of mead for the price of just 1. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant. And I don't know if you've seen this exchange that Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri had with this wild-eyed, woke Berkeley professor the day before yesterday, I think it was. But the chances are pretty good that you have, because it's gone a bit viral, as the youngsters are fond of saying. I don't know which Senate committee it was or what the topic of the hearing was, but it doesn't freaking matter anyway. We can safely assume that it was, if a dumbass whacktivist like this broad is up on Capitol Hill testifying about pregnant men, the hearing is about something stupid and unimportant. But there seems to be nothing we love more, we Americans of the third decade of the 21st century, than to spend our time arguing about things that are stupid and unimportant. Things that up until 5, 6, 7 years ago, through several thousand generations of human history, it never occurred to anyone to argue about. And it's even more embarrassing for us right now, because we are a country and a nation that has no shortage of extremely serious problems to talk about. And yet our whole public discourse seems to screech to a halt for 48 hours every time some idiot college professor tries to lecture a senator about, well, of course men can have babies. And you are doing violence on me by even asking that question, Senator. Trans people will commit suicide by the hundreds because of what you've just done here, sir. So how do you feel about yourself? And you know what I love about this? The only reason I have chosen to talk about this incident here tonight, because Professor Wendy Wokington, I don't feel like giving her the dignity of looking up her actual name, she uses both of the 2 main fallacies that trans activists always throw out there whenever they are confronted with the prospect of having to defend their worldview in some sort of intellectually coherent manner, which they can't do, of course. And there are 2 cards they always try to play in the same order, and it's so common you've probably seen it dozens of times on the internet. The first one, and they always do this, when you first confront them with a question for which they know there is not a good answer, the thing they invariably say, almost as a reflex action, is something about how trans people are more prone to suicide and self-harm than any other population. And the implication is, well, I don't have to answer that question, because just by asking it, you monster, you've probably caused a mass suicide that's going to look like a transsexual Jonestown. They're going to be cleaning up the bodies for days because you asked me that. Now, there are a lot of people on the right who are fawning over how well Josh Hawley acquitted himself here, and amazingly, leftist YouTube is overflowing with videos about how Professor Wokington totally owned the evil transphobic senator. But whatever, I ain't going to sign that memo. I don't think he handled it nearly as well as he should have handled it, frankly, or as well as it could have been handled, because he didn't directly call out either of the fallacies that she threw at him. And he kept answering questions with questions, which you'd never, ever want to do if you're actually trying to win an argument. But he's not alone in this, because this first canard, the one where you just throw out some line about how prone to suicide the trans community is, I don't think I've heard one single person on the right actually give the correct response. So as a public service, here it is. And feel free to take notes, senators, because there will be a quiz. When someone says you're not allowed to criticize transgenderism because it might make trans people kill themselves, there is only one thing to say to that. You say, well, if transgender people are more prone to suicide than any other group, then it would seem that changing your gender is not the magic ticket to happiness and fulfillment that its advocates are always claiming it is. In other words, it's a fallacy that discredits the entire worldview of the person who is trying to use it. So as long as you respond to it in the correct way, which nobody seems very interested in doing, including Josh Hawley. But God, if he would have directly confronted it and smacked it down in a high-profile setting like that, it would have ended the ability of dishonest people to keep using it. And it's so damning to their cause, and it takes so words to refute it effectively. Well, Professor, if trans people are that prone to suicide after they trans themselves, then transgenderism is not 100% good and wonderful and virtuous thing, because you can't have it both ways. And the other classic canard this professor used, one whose use is by no means limited to those who engage in transgender activism is the one that says, you, sir, are doing violence on me by asking that question. And man, talk about trying to have it both ways. On the one hand, if you don't speak up loudly and enthusiastically enough for the maniacal radical leftist worldview, they scream at you that your silence is violence. And then, on the other hand, if you're not silent, if you say words, but they're not the correct words that express the proper views, which, for our purposes, means anything that would be considered socially normative at a dinner party on Martha's Vineyard, then your words are violence, just like your silence was violence before. And these are the same people who tell us, no, we're not against free speech. We would never want to throw people in jail for saying the wrong words. Who, us? The diversity-loving liberals who want a big inclusive tent for everybody? Speech codes? You are doing violence on me by these insipid remonstrations, and I've half a mind to challenge you to a duel, sir, that I might repair the injury done to my sacred honor by these monstrous slanders. This professor, and I still don't give a damn enough to look up her name, but she is a real piece of work. And if you're a parent in California currently paying 60 or 70 grand a year for your kid to go to one of the UC campuses, you should be forced to watch this video. So you cannot claim ignorance about the sort of radical activist lunatics who are teaching your kids and for which you are paying good money. So when your son or daughter comes home for Thanksgiving and sounds like the president of the Karl Marx fan club, professors like this are the reason why. And you are paying a six-figure sum for that, all told. If you're still operating in the belief that bundling your kid off to the University of California for 4 years and paying whatever the hell the tuition is will confer any useful skills when the 4 years are over, or prepare that young person in any way to function as a grown adult in the real world, you need to stop thinking that, because it just ain't true. A college education, in the sense of what that term used to mean when you were in college 20, 25, 30 years ago, that does not exist anymore. Do you remember Ward Churchill? He was a poli-sci professor, University of Colorado, who became an object of intense national controversy about 20 years ago because he hated the United States, he was openly a socialist, and he wasn't bashful about saying so. They did segments on all of the network news about this guy, feature articles in all the big newspapers, the whole shooting match. It was a major national story that there was one tenured professor in the United States at a state university who was openly an America-hating commie. Today, a couple of short decades later, drive up to any state university campus in the country and I guarantee you will run into 10 Ward Churchills before you even get out of the faculty parking lot. Being an America-hating commie is not the exception anymore. It is the damn rule. So if you're still wondering how we wound up with a generation of young adults who think barking mad off the deep end radical leftism is really just middle-of-the-road milquetoast thinking, the answer is right in front of you, but I know you're busy dutifully scratching out those tuition checks, so don't let me interrupt you. And speaking of people scratching checks, or not scratching checks, as the case may be, we haven't yet talked about the fact that the Elon Musk Twitter deal appears to have fallen through and done so irretrievably, though Twitter evidently thinks they have a chance at suing him into completing the purchase anyway, which they totally do not, but good luck with that anyway, losers, I guess. And no, I'm not bringing this up just because it turns out that I was right about the whole thing in my first assessment. That happens all the time, no need to get hung up on it. But I did say, on the first day the news of the deal broke, that I would not be surprised if it was all just an elaborate troll on Mr. Musk's part, and that if he pulled it off, it would be one of the greatest trolls in the history of trolling, frankly. So let's reiterate how the thing happened in the first place. You'll remember that there was a period of a week, 2 weeks, when Elon started making very pointed statements about how Twitter, as it is currently constituted, is a bad thing. Its owners are partisan hacks, and it diminishes the quality of the public discourse rather than improving it. And then, all of a sudden, comes the news that Musk is gonna buy Twitter for $44 billion, which seemed like a shockingly high number that vastly overvalues the brand. And since Elon didn't get to where he is by spending large sums in stupid ways, there was ample reason for wondering what he might really be up to. And I said at the time that maybe the purpose of this whole exercise is just to force Twitter to expose its own corruption, thereby tanking the stock price, thereby hastening the demise of the brand itself. Now, how long has Twitter been around? 14, 15 years now? So in other words, if you're a youngster today, let's say under age 21, you don't remember a world that didn't have Twitter in it. Twitter, in other words, is your parents' social media platform. It might as well be from ancient Egypt for all you care. And we still have no reason to believe that internet companies, with the sole exception of Google, are capable of getting past the 20-year mark without being vastly diminished or defunct outright. It has yet to be demonstrated that internet companies have the ability to remain viable into a third decade. And there's no particular reason to believe Twitter is going to be any different, which is why it struck so many people as odd that a forward-thinking futurist like Elon Musk would make a serious offer of $44 billion for a piece of shit company with a negligible fading future, which is exactly what Twitter is. It seems the sticking point that blew the deal apart was Twitter's refusal to disclose the true number of bots and sock puppet accounts that are on the platform. So obviously, it's a number so large that they think disclosing it would ruin the brand. And if I'm gauging the relative intellect of the two parties in this deal, I'm saying Musk is a hell of a lot smarter than anybody on Twitter's board. So he had to know that this refusal had a good chance of happening. And since the deal was contingent upon that disclosure, he had to know the deal was likely to collapse because of it. And that was going to be the reason. And you know why else I think Twitter is doomed? Because how many people have we seen get their lives ruined by some dumb crap they tweeted out 8, 10, 12 years ago? The number of people who delete their Twitter accounts in order to avoid that same fate, that number is only ever going to keep growing. And it is not going to be offset or even close by new customers signing up for a second-generation social media platform. Twitter will never be cool for the youngsters. And many of their parents will be eager to move on from it and find a new social media platform on which to publicly blast out every dumbass thought that flits through their cerebellum each day. So if it winds up being true that Mr. Musk pulled an epic troll that was designed to accelerate the demise of a brand that he views, and quite correctly, as a malign entity in the world, then let me be the first to offer him my thanks for the valuable public service that he has performed. And if he wants to invite me to be one of the first Martian settlers, I freaking accept. No, Jim Eagle, there's no producers invited. They only want people with useful skills. I'm sorry. And we'll leave it there for tonight. Thanks very much for watching. See you Friday. Have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.